Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
It's wonderful to see such a full house. Everybody's back from the holidays. Next, I think we go around and say our names. I'm George.
Greg.
David. Tucker.
I'm Joe.
Juan.
My name is Michael.
Tim.
Don.
My name is Cass.
My name is Harley.
My name is Bob.
I'm Clint.
I'm Jerry.
Matthew. I'm Ed.
I'm Larry.
My name is Mark.
I'm Mike.
Mariano.
Jack. Stephen.
Tony.
Dennis.
Samuel.
Jim.
Rob.
Peter.
I'm Hal.
I'm Daniel.
My name is Jim.
Jay.
I'm Richard.
I'm Jeffrey.
Anybody new or here after a long absence besides Deborah and Daniel? Okay. Please make Deborah and Daniel feel welcome today. Speaker. Yes, our speaker today, most of you know, is a member of the Sangha. His name is Baruch Golden. And if I can read this. Baruch is a longtime GBF member who has been practicing Vipassana meditation since 1998. He completed Spirit Rock's Community Dharma Leaders Program in 2012 and the Buddhist Chaplaincy Training Program with the Sati Center in Redwood City in 2013. He teaches Dharma primarily at the East Bay Meditation Center, and Baruch is a registered nurse and did hospice work for the past 14 years. Welcome, Baruch.
Thank you. So let me know if you can't hear during the talk. It was nice to sit here and just hear the rain. I think I can hear it better since I'm sitting really close to it. I don't ever remember hearing it. So this talk is part of a series of 4 talks exploring intimacy and the Dharma. And so I hope that this talk will be interesting enough so that you'll come back and listen to the next 3. I'm curating the talk, so I'll be doing, there's a little error in the newsletter. I'll be doing this talk and then the 4th talk, and then not the 2nd and the 3rd talk. So, and I think all of the people that'll be presenting have really interesting perspectives on intimacy, which is a pretty big topic. And just like the Dharma, it's something that you could practice with for your whole life. As I was coming here on BART, I was just thinking about my relationship with this Sangha, and when I first started coming here, how intimacy was not something that I was really interested in. I would just come in, I'd sit over exactly where you're sitting, and I would listen to the talk, and I would get up and I would leave, and for a really long period of time, no one even knew my name except for one person, Jim, who's not here today. And he'd always say, "Oh, hi, Baruch," and then I would say hi, and then I would leave. And it took me a long time to settle into this Sangha. But I definitely felt the refuge of coming here, even though I could sit here and feel quite alone with my practice. And so I was just reflecting on how when we walk into this room that this is really a field of practice for us in relationship to intimacy, and that as we move, we encounter all these different energies in the form of human beings, and that some energies we are drawn towards, some we're drawn away from them, and then many we just are oblivious to, and that we could bring awareness and practice to. We have some choices when we walk into this room. We can decide to move towards all energies and incline our practice towards being more intimate and friendly and familiar with each other, or we could stay kind of neutral. And another possibility as a result of doing these talks, hopefully, is that something that you hear or some practice that you listen to, you'll be interested in taking into your own practice as you move through the world, so that you could incline thinking and being in a more friendly, intimate way in the world. So I hope it has some impact on you. I live in the East Bay, and I go to the Berkeley Buddhist Monastery on the first Tuesdays, and monks from Abhayagiri Monastery come down and they do a talk. And there's they have two co-abbots. One of the co-abbots is Karuna Dhammo, and they start off from 5:30 to 6:30. They have tea, and you could ask basically the monk any question that you want to ask. And Karuna Dharma was talking about the trajectory of his practice and how it hasn't. He ordained when he was in like 19, and now I think he's 62. And so he's been practicing for a really long time. And he was talking about how he wasted years of his practice as a monk, really having very undirected, unfocused practice, and that sometimes his practice felt like he was being dragged behind an oxen cart against his will. And it made me think of that Hafiz poem, Behind a Farting Camel. And I don't know if I want to read the whole thing, but it's a really interesting poem, and that's how sometimes it feels to me, kind of this practice towards moving towards intimacy. It's not necessarily an easy practice. There's a lot of obstacles and bumps. Mostly they're internal things that come up, but when the internal often meets the external. So Hafiz says, I guess I'll read the whole thing. Behind a farting camel, he says, I know the voice of depression still calls to you. I know those habits that can ruin your life still send their invitations. But you are with me, friend, now, and look so much stronger. You can stay that way and even bloom. Learn to recognize the counterfeit coins that may buy you just a moment of pleasure, but then drag you for days like a broken man behind a farting camel. That's my favorite line. I can really relate to that. I mean, how many times have we felt like we've been dragged behind a farting camel? Oh, keep squeezing drops of the sun from your prayers and work and music, and from your companions' beautiful laughter, and from the most insignificant movements of your holy body. Now, sweet one, be wise. Cast all your votes for dancing. So that's kind of, I think, a good way to practice the movement towards intimacy. I'll just speak for myself, but I can extrapolate that throughout our lives, most of us long for deeper connection with other people, and to have more love in our life. This inability to see and remember our interconnection with the world and with each other becomes impaired often by this delusion that we're separate from other people And it's hard to remember that we are actually interconnected to other people. So this sense of being apart from all around us gives rise to the pain and suffering that we sometimes call loneliness and isolation. My vision isn't very good, so I tried to raise this up so I could actually see this. So I did a talk on intimacy here last year, I think. And then there was an interest in having a more expanded version or exploring it more. And at that time I asked people to just throw out adjectives that describe intimacy, because for all of us intimacy has different meaning. And at the time I was working with 4 adjectives that seemed to really represent intimacy in interaction, in relational practices, and in relationship to myself. And those words were vulnerability, reciprocity, being transparent, and staying in dialogue. And now I sort of just think of intimacy as the state of making known or being seen. It's being seen by ourselves, knowing ourselves, someone else seeing us, and knowing us. So the talk, I don't know what will happen next week, but the talk next week will be more on relational kind of intimacy, the kind of intimacy that we have with each other. The talk in the 3rd week will be looking at decolonizing sexuality in our minds and our body. And then the last week it'll be more of a relational kind of experience, maybe. We'll see what happens over the weeks. But this talk right here, this is my disclaimer. This talk, I'll probably never even get to the talk. This talk, doesn't matter, there's 4 weeks, right? One of the things about intimacy that I've learned in my multi-year investigation is that when we move slow and mindfully, there's the possibility for more intimacy to occur. As people, as males, socialized and conditioned as males, we're trained to move really quickly. And so just kind of slowing down is a very powerful act towards intimacy. And so I began this multi-year investigation, which sometimes feels like an interrogation, sometimes it feels like I'm asleep. After I came back from, I intensified my investigation after I had returned from Burma. I went to Burma in 2016 with Temple Smith, who I guess we're trying to get to talk here. And I went on tour with him, and then I stayed for a couple weeks and did practice in Burma. And what sometimes happens when you do more extended practice is that what happens to me is the way that I know things all of a sudden doesn't really make sense anymore. And so when I came back from Burma, it felt like my life was falling apart. And up until that point, I had really thought I had been conditioned to think of intimacy in relationship to one other person. I think that's a very heterosexual model. There's a lot of different exploration in the gay, queer community around different models. And one really of the best places to look at and practice intimacy is in our relationship with a primary partner and what we call open relationships, and that kind of communication that we have with each other, because that communication can bring us closer together or it can bring us farther apart. It's a very tricky area. So since I was holding this model of having intimacy in another relation with another person, and I wasn't in a relationship, it was a very dysfunctional, impractical model for me. And so I started turning towards the Dharma to see what the Dharma would offer. In addition, I also looked online. I started interested to hear what everybody had thought about it. And there's a lot out there about intimacy, but I was especially interested in what the Dharma had to say about it. And I really recognized that the model that I was using was really impractical, and it was causing a lot of suffering and pain for me. So I was very motivated by that. And so what I am going to focus on today a little bit is kind of this, how it's often talked about and seen and presented in Buddhism by our Western Buddhist teachers. And I'm very much in the Western Buddhist Theravadan insight tradition. And in my home base where I do my retreat practice is Spirit Rock Meditation Center in Marin County. And so I started kind of an investigation of listening to talks online. There are places, libraries with thousands of talks, and I started doing searches around intimacy and sexuality and eroticism, and to see what I could come up with, and I came up with not very many talks. And they were primarily, I think, all but one was by a heterosexual teacher, as far as I know. And I started having conversations with the teachers that I am in relationship, seeing if they could advise me to move in a different direction. And what I read was that intimacy really is about paying attention to what's happening to us in the moment. It's paying attention to this breath and the next, this footstep and the next, this bite, this body sensation, this feeling, this mood. It's slowing down and really kind of inhabiting this human form that we have and knowing what's happening. And that in itself is a very intimate experience. And that as we do that practice, which we're all doing, when we're doing these awareness practices that we're doing, we're meditating together. Theoretically, the idea is that we get to know ourselves more, and as we become more aware of what we're not aware of, we're able to share that in the world. And so by default, the practice that we begin with ourselves extends out to others. And that extension to others is a movement towards, and can be a movement towards being more intimate, more familiar, more friendly. But what happens with intimacy is that just having an awareness practice, just doing, I'll just say sitting meditation because everybody's sitting, it doesn't necessarily and organically flow into greater intimacy. We know ourselves more kind of relational intimacy, and so we need to join intention and action and take what we're learning on the cushion and on these zafus and chairs and bring that out to the world. So the passivity of sitting isn't necessarily the ingredients that's going to lead us to having greater intimacy. I mean, I could sit in this room and listen to someone talking about loving kindness and feel so incredibly isolated and alone, even though we're talking about that practice. So there's a huge amount of intention in the practice. But the sitting practice, the awareness practices, the meditation practices are a huge contradiction to mindlessness. Mindlessness, the opposite of mindfulness, and the habitual patterns and ways of dysfunction that are embodied in these bodies that we bring with us to the interactions that we have and the relationships that we already have. So theoretically, as we do practice, we're becoming more aware of our body, of our mind, of the impulses and intentions of the heart. So just the decision to sit and do practice is this huge decision. And we all have different practices. Some of us sit just here on Sunday. Some of us have a daily sitting practice. There's people that are sitting multiple times a day. And at a certain point we hear people who are up here encourage us to practice outside or off of the cushion, off of the zafu. And we start understanding that that is possible. And so we choose certain ways of doing that particular type of practice. And just to mention that kind of our usual experience, what we call normal, is being out in the world and being in super stimulating environments where we're often asked to do many things at the same time. Often when we're driving and we're doing, hopefully we're not texting while we're driving, or we're maintaining our different technologies. We're doing all this kinds of stuff, and it's a very kind of stimulating environment, and that's what we call normal. And then when we sit and meditate, it can often feel kind of strange and quiet and awkward, and sometimes it can feel weird and stressful just sitting quietly with ourselves, because we're using ourselves in a completely different way. We're sitting relatively still. We're not talking out loud. There's a lot of talk going on in our head, and we're really noticing. Do I feel still and quiet? Am I being harsh and judgmental towards myself or the person that I'm sitting next to? And so this is a slowing down process, and that's what I was referring to, is just the like all these years that I've been looking at this, it comes to is just basically slowing down. And sometimes we have that experience when we're sitting, like we come in and everything's really chaotic, and then when we leave, it's less chaotic. It's not as chaotic. So we're basically learning how to use our mind and our body and our heart in a different way. And we have the opportunity to experience some of the kind of what it feels like to be a normal activity when we sit. So it's kind of like sort of like a snow globe. Like we walk in and everything's shaking up, and then as we sit here, then there's some settling, and sometimes there's a lot of settling, and it can be quite still and easeful. So I was looking through the archives of GBF, because there's like thousands, right, hundreds of talks there. And I was really stunned. I came across a talk, and it was actually transcribed in the May 2006 newsletter, which is available online if you'd like to see the whole talk. I didn't listen to the talk, I just read the transcription, but the transcription is from a talk that was done in 1995 by Eric Kovic. So a lot of you probably know who he was. He was probably our first out gay teacher, and he's retired now. And the talk happened before I was even part of the Sangha. And the title of the talk was "Sexuality as Dharma Practice." And I remember, like, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I did a talk on sexuality, and I had done searches for that also, and I couldn't find any talks, and so I was really kind of stunned when I found this talk. And he was talking about, there was a period of time when he was living in Massachusetts at the Insight Meditation Center, IMS, and he apparently, from this talk, he lived there for years. And I wanted to read an experience that he described. He was talking about how he made the decision at that time to put his life on hold, including his sexual life, and to focus on meditation. So he goes, I thought it was a really beautiful example of intimacy with yourself. He goes, during a 1.5-year-long retreat at Inside Meditation Society, he lived and practiced in a big, deep tent in the forest. I've never been there. But apparently they have something called the Forest Refuge. It's a beautiful place belonging to the retreat center. I was completely alone there, a hermit. I walked out to the meditation center for food once a day and spent the rest of my time in the remote forest. In many ways, it was the happiest time of my life. My mind became very clear, calm, and open. I had kind of an erotic relationship to that forest world. It wasn't genital, but sometimes on a hot day I would take off all my clothes and walk through the woods with my body exposed to the sun, the shade, the touch of branches and leaves. And walk 1.5 miles to the old reservoir. There I'd go for a long swim and then walk back to the tent. It was just wonderful. I felt connected to the world of trees, birdsong, deer, and wildflowers. And it's just like, whoa, I couldn't believe it. It was so amazing. And just exactly what intimacy is all about. It's coming back to ourself, right? It's having those experiences. When I think in 1990, my friend Yuri, I don't know, some of you may even know Yuri Kuchero, he died, and very uncomfortable death from HIV/AIDS. And one day I was talking with him, and he told me he had gone to Marin, and he had seen this beautiful sunset. And he felt this tremendous, for a period of time, he felt this tremendous sense of ease and peace and quiet and stillness. And while he was telling me that, I felt like there was a transmission. I felt what he felt, and he used that experience as a touch point during his dying process, and it really provided a lot of refuge for him. So he had this one moment of intimacy where he felt this. So those moments can be quite powerful. And I think that most of us, maybe everybody, have had those moments where, everything falls away and we just have this very present experience of ourself in the world. And the times where that has happened to me, I remember all of them. Sometimes they were when I was on drugs. But now, and they were so random and intermittent, and I could not make them happen. But I did have, every time it did happen, I just felt like it was a tremendous gift. I noticed when I started doing this practice towards intimacy that they started happening more frequently. I still didn't have any control, but just inclining my mind and moving towards every interaction, every person, it happened. It started happening more often. Sometimes, with complete strangers, sometimes by myself. So this is a place of refuge for us, right? I come here as a refuge. We talk about in Buddhism, we talk about the 3 refuges. We talk about Sangha, or the community of practitioners, as refuge. And I always come here because there's a certain kind of sense of protection that I feel when I come here. And I think that's in contrast to, someone just sent me this article, which I read last year too, called Together Alone, the Epidemic of Gay Loneliness. It was posted in the Huffington Post. If anyone's interested, you could ask me. I'll send you the link. It's a very kind of personal account by this guy. I forget what his name is. I think Michael Hobbs. But embedded in his personal account are these links which link to academic studies of gay men, documenting kind of loneliness. And one of the things that he talks about is we've made a lot of progress. I mean, there's been changes in policy. We can get married. Things are kind of externally, they seem better, but the level of, he says, depression and loneliness and substance abuse hasn't changed with any of the progress that we've made. It's sort of static within our community. And so then he goes on and he cites a bunch of statistics, how gay men are more likely to kill themselves, we have higher rates of depression. anxiety. And there were a couple of things he said that were very startling to me, which I think relate really a lot to intimacy. He talks about, despite all the talk of our chosen families, gay men have fewer close friends than straight people or gay women. Which I don't know about that. But it was weird, that. And then there was a study linking to support that. It's hard for me to imagine straight men have more friends than gay men. but maybe, And then he talks about, this is like really, I think, the crux of what happens and what we're trying to do with practice, is he talks about kind of some of the things that contribute to this sense of disconnection that we feel in the world, which makes it so hard for us to have friendships, really deep, close friendships with people. He says gay men are just not very nice to each other. And then he gives the example of the drag queen and the takedown, how they can just kind of destroy you with their speech. And he says the meanness is almost pathological. All of us were deeply confused or lying to ourselves a good chunk of our adolescence, and we kind of carried some of the misperceptions and mistreatments that we experienced ourselves. And we've carried that with us into the community. So he says that there's 2 reasons for this, and I'm sure there's many more than 2 reasons, but one of the reasons is that we kind of sort of mean to each other and mistreat each other. I'm not saying that you do. Maybe this is a super kind place and we're very kind to each other. But I've always been struck by how kind of, as males who identify as gay or as queer, how we interact and how we treat each other. He says one reason is because we're men. And that's how men relate to each other. And the second reason he says is that the gay community acts as its own unique stressor. And I can really see that. Kind of maybe 10 years ago, the ways that we met each other in different ways, and now we rely heavily on social media. And I think the level of meanness has increased in how we treat each other. And then he goes on and cites a bunch of things like how kind of the average person every day spends 90 minutes in social media trying to connect with other people. And sometimes, maybe on Grindr or I forget what that other one's called. Scrub? Tinder? God, there's so many. And then I was startled on my cell phone. I got this message, and it said, I can't believe this. It was saying, I spend 3 hours a day looking at my cell phone. And I'm like, oh, that's impossible. I don't think that's true. I hope it's not true. So, and then, if you do read, articles, and I was reading this article in the Atlantic magazine. It was directed towards millennials, but it was called The Recession of Sex. And I thought it had a lot of application. It just talks about how much time we can spend trying to connect with somebody. And it gives the example of this guy. He's a straight guy, and he's trying to connect with women. But he says, I guess on some of those you could swipe. Like, I like you, I like you. And so for every 30 swipes, he'll get one message. And then he'll respond to every one of those messages, and for every 10 messages, he gets one reply. So he's basically, I think if I do the math right, it's like 300, contacts to get one reply. So that seems like, and then in this article is talking about how we can spend, he says we spend 10 hours talking to people on the app for every 1 hour that we actually spend with the person in person. I mean, with a person like in front of us. So, anyway, so that's kind of our situation that we're in a little bit. Let's see. Trying to stay on track here. So, I'm not going to get through everything, but I'll just pick it up when I come back. There's this really, because one thing that I really wanted to talk about is honesty, truth-telling, and speech, and how that's really connected with intimacy. That's like an amazing practice. But I wanted to talk about it mostly from the perspective of how we talk to ourselves. Like, how truthful are we with ourselves? It's a big question. I often talk with people who, well, maybe I'll start talking about it. I often talk with people who have these stories about themselves. Whenever someone says, oh, I'm like this, I was like, well, I know that's bullshit. I mean, you were like that in one moment, but you're not like that anymore. That's a story that you told and that you has ossified. It's like, let's see what happens if you let go of that story. Let's figure out who it is that you really are. Let's see if you could actually see the truth about yourself. So anyway, so truth-telling is a really important thing, and it's really about right speech, right? And it's about right speech in relationship to ourselves and to other people. There's a direct correspondence between how truthful we are in the world and to ourselves and the level of wisdom that we have as we move towards liberation. That cannot be out of sync. The Buddha actually said, or it said that if you're a bodhisattva, and maybe we have some bodhisattvas in here, that the one precept or guideline that they can't break is telling a lie. It's so important as a gay man growing up in this culture, and as a male growing up in this culture, I have basically been trained to lie. And one of the biggest places that I lie is to myself. So it's kind of an untangling that we have to do in order to let go of all the lies that we're... In fact, coming here today, I was... my sister is staying with me, and I was up with her during the night, and I was like, oh no, I'm going to be really exhausted, and I was coming up with a lie about why I was so tired. It's just like, oh, that's ridiculous. So it kind of comes up all the time. But Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is some of you may know him, he is an academic scholar and monk, and has translated a lot of Buddhist texts from Pali into English. He wrote an article, a really short essay, really beautiful essay called Taking Stock of Ourself, that I refer to a lot. And basically he says is that the punchline to that is that we have to do a thorough and honest self-evaluation in our Dharma practice to move towards liberation, and that if we don't really honestly look at ourselves, then we're going to get stuck. And I remember when I started doing practice, I had this idea that there was a direct link between practicing from suffering and bondage to freedom and liberation. Like, oh, I just start practicing and then bam, And it shouldn't take very long. And then as I started practicing, I started realizing that, oh, it's really not like that. It can be kind of a torturous route of kind of unexpected twists and turns, and that it really involves becoming aware of the entangled mental topography of my mind. It's like, well, what's going on in there? What is it that I'm working with? And so that's really an important thing, and we don't really I've never gotten a lot of direction, or maybe I just don't listen to it when I get it, about doing that. And so as do you identify as a gay man?
Me?
Yeah. Because I'm speaking, and I don't want to exclude you. So you could just fill in however.
Oh no, I'm good.
Okay, you're good.
We'll make it an honorary thing.
I don't want to pick on you, but I think as people who identify as gay or queer or however it is that we all identify, that we carry this big, huge, enormous weight of growing it gay in this culture where there's so many misperceptions and ideas and oppression that's directed towards us, and we internalize that. And so as a result of that, we all have our particular kind of wounding that's different than if we don't identify like that. And so as a result of that, when we start looking at intimacy and moving towards another person, becoming more familiar, becoming more friendly, I think it's important to realize that U.S. culture preferences or gives a higher value to people that are heterosexual, that people that are in partnered relationships or in a couple relationship. Within the gay community, there's a preference for immediate gratification over a slow, mindful engagement process. I mean, this is kind of what we're working with. This is the field that a strong physical chemistry with another person is preferenced over weak or no chemistry. And that the ways that we often interact are in direct contradiction to closeness. Like hookups and impersonal sexual encounters, there's often not much or any emotional connection with the person that you're connecting with. So those are all, challenges to move towards. And then, homophobia tells us that, and I think a lot of us have really internalized that we're defective, that we're deviant, we can be damaged, we don't deserve love. That's a big one, we really don't deserve love, that we're unlovable, we're not good enough. And then as we get older, we become invisible, right? There's a particular type of oppression that happens to us, is that we feel like we're not being seen because we're older within this culture. And then we, because we have grown up kind of in mostly heterosexual families, there's a particular way that we've kind of been wounded by those families. We all carry a certain amount of kind of psychological or emotional or physical trauma connected to our families. And so, I'm just kind of naming that we have these kinds of woundings that it's taken me really a long time to look at. And that because for me, I came here for a long time, but I also have gone and been parts of other sitting groups and Buddhist sanghas, is that a lot of the teaching that I hear is from heterosexual or straight people. And so because of that, a lot of the things that would have been beneficial for me to look at were never named by them. They never named things that were really important for me to look at, so I never thought about practicing with that. They never talked about homophobia or the impact, internalized homophobia. They didn't talk about sexuality, that sort of thing, eroticism. And so a lot of what I listened to wasn't really relevant to me. So, so that's just kind of the context that we practice in. And so, one of the benefits of being here is that a lot more things are named, and naming things are really helpful if we want to include them in our practice. So I think I'll close just to see if there's any comments. But we can incline practice in any direction that we want to. So if we intentionally decide that what we want to do is move towards other people, be more intimate in our life, be more intimate in every interaction that we have, we can make that decision, and that's a way that we can practice. And I've done a lot of practice like that, where I've made the decision to be as intimate as possible in every moment, and I often forget, but when I remember in any situation with any person, I can pay attention to whether my energy is moving towards that person or moving away from that person, and whether I'm more neutral about it. And when I decide to move towards a person, then that presents an opportunity to have more connection. So, I want to just read this poem. You might know it. It's by Derek Walcott, Love After Love. He died in 2017. He was, I think he was born in Canada, and he lived most of his life in America. He taught at a lot of prestigious universities, but it's a poem about kind of this journey that we're on. He goes, "The day will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, 'Sit here, eat.' You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life." I really love some of the lines in here. He goes, "Give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you have ignored for another, who knows you by heart." I think for me, a lot of times when I'm thinking about intimacy, is that's where I always come back. I come back to myself, because I erroneously think that it's external, that I'm going to get it outside of myself. So, anyway, I'll stop and see if there's any comments. Remember, I'm not an expert on intimacy. This presentation is an imperfect and maybe impractical expression of where I am at this time. So, say your name.
My name is Bob. Thank you so much. My mind wound up traveling to lots of places while you were talking. One of the things in your discussion of intimacy, I think except in the last poem, you never use the word love. And for me, the intimacy you were describing is the kind of love I like to have or think I'm having with people I know. And the problem I realize is that in English, we only have one word for love. Greeks have at least 4. So there's a very real limitation. But I'm not going to go on and on because, like I said, my mind went to lots of places. But so much of what you said made me think of what I want love, what I think love is, and what I want it to be.
Thank you for a provocative topic and presentation. So I'm interested in the intersection between the takedown and the being nice and truth-telling and intimacy. It's like, yes, those jeans do make your ass look fat. I mean, it seems to me that intimacy involves truth-telling, and being nice is not necessarily being intimate.
Yeah.
And I guess it depends on the intention. Is the intention to wound, or is the intention to be supportive in an honest way? But it seems like those studies that you cite, I question whether kind of truth-telling is valued. And it seems to me that that's part of like being able to tell somebody what you really think is an intimate, is an exercise in intimacy.
Thank you. Yeah. I have a whole section on truth-telling. I'll get. There's so much to say about that. Yeah. But one of the ways, I'll just say that one of the ways that I learned about language was when I was a sister of perpetual indulgence long ago, and I was studying a lot of the sisters who could take down anybody at any moment, and I especially Sister Boom Boom, who spoke here, who was just a master of that. I mean, if we were in a difficult situation, I would always stand behind Boom Boom. It's kind of like, but I don't necessarily think that that's a movement towards, Even, go on. I've talked about it. Yes.
Well, I was thinking of my brother's sister who can say those jeans make your ass look fat in a kind of loving sort of way. And the first thing that came to me is she slows down. She thinks for a moment, and the words have spaces between them. Where I think that the come down, one of the features of it is its quickness. And so I think you can truth tell, but slow down.
And Clint, did you have something?
Well, it's just, you stirred up a very old memory that I had before I joined GBF. God, it was about 26 years ago, where I was in a difficult time in my life, and I was going to Green Gulch Zen Center, and they had some talk announced, a group about exploring Buddhism and sexuality. So I thought, well, that sounds interesting. So I went to the little group, and everybody there was heterosexual, and they were talking about sexuality with their wives, with their husbands, and partners and sorts. And I wasn't even trying to be provocative. There's more clues than anything else. I said, what about sexuality, intimacy, and casual sex? And there was like crickets. Everybody just had this embarrassed silence, and I realized, well, this probably isn't. I like the people there. This probably isn't a great fit. And so I looked for a gay version of Buddhism. That's how I found out this GBF had just started like about 3 weeks before. And so that's one reason why that's one reason why I'm here. And I actually for Queer Dharma, the first book, I wrote a column, an article about applying Buddhist Dharma to casual sex, and I got a lot of blowback on that. But anyway, it's just interesting. I mean, I don't think casual sex is the best way to have an intimate relationship. But I do think that even if you're engaged in that, you can do it in a loving, kind way rather than in a dismissive or cold way. So I'm just throwing that out.
I would say, yes.
Well, there's so much from my experience back when I was doing this. There's a lot of harshness and meanness in that forum, and I don't think that has to be. That was just the point I was trying to make.
Man, I have a huge response to that.
Clark?
I feel like as you were talking, it was really interesting, and I was thinking about I was at this weekend recently where I felt very close to certain people, and one of them is this, middle range celebrity who in the course of a dinner, I'd only met her 3 nights before, told me how her mother had broken her wrist when she was a little kid. She was about to hit her face and she put her hand up. Her mother broke her wrist. And I don't know what category, I used to be able to remember the Greek categories of love, but it feels to me like one of the limitations, one of the things I like about coming here is there are all these different approaches, and there can be some depth and things that are provocative. And one of the limitations in every Buddhist group I've ever gone to is that there's a kind of an essentialization process of like what is good, what is bad. You know, like the idea that someone thousands of years ago who lived in a completely different life, even if what is said about him is accurate, which is unlikely, the idea that truthfulness is the only thing, saying something untrue is the only thing that's bad. It must have been a bodhisattva who was at the time of the Anne Frank of the Holocaust, or at the time of the Underground Railroad, who would have thought, like, wow, lying is one of the most essential skills that there is. So I wish that we could have more of a discussion sometimes about, like, you know, what is it that works for different people? You know, does the takedown bring people, in particular, people close or not? What is it that we in particular like? What is the kind of love that we like? Rather than the notion of, like, this is the right way of doing that. And it's built a little bit into the structure of the way that Buddhism has been taught. And I was in a dedicated practitioners program in Spirit Rock, and I remember at one point they said, well, who doesn't believe in karma? And I and three other people raised our hands. And then we went outside and we had this very intimate personal discussion about that with friends. So that's just an invitation for us to try to not replicate the structure of what's good and what's bad, which has, in a universal way, as opposed to, you know, this is what I find useful. I don't really find casual sex very useful. It would be great if I did. It sounds friends of mine do, but I don't. But I have no I think I have no judgments about people who have casual sex. I have judgments about people who murder each other. Like, that's just kind of not okay. Like, generally speaking, like, trying to understand others rather than trying to, like, classify this as good or bad in some there's a universal, pan-cultural, pan-individual way.
Thank you. Is there no? That's it?
Are we out of time? I don't know.
Do we have time for one more?
I don't know. When are we supposed to stop? We're out of time. We're out of time? Okay. Thank you, Jack. I'm new at this, so. Announcements. Thank you, Baruch. First of all, thank you very much. Announcements? Richard?
Yeah, I'm going to do a meditation retreat, a Wildwood retreat in Guerneville, California, January 18th to the 20th. Steve Turney is going to be our Dharma teacher. There's some flyers out there that have more information. There's a contingent coming from GBF, and we're about 3/4 full. We'd love to have more GBFers there, but if you're seriously thinking about it, I suggest you act sooner than later, or you'll have to sleep in the garage with the sleeping bag.
Anybody else? Michael?
Yeah, GBF will be hosting in March our annual spring day-long retreat. And it's going to be March 23rd, and the teacher is going to be Cindy Spring, who some of you, I'm sure, heard her talk. She wrote a book called The Wave and the Drop, sort of cross-cultural stories about death and dying. Registration's not open yet, but we will have flyers in the coming weeks with a link to online registration.
Is that here, Michael?
Yeah, it's here, and lunch will be provided. And there's no registration fee, just Dharma for the teacher.
This is the first Sunday of the month, and we're resuming the Radical Dharma book group discussion group. I didn't put anything out recently about it, but it's been going around for a while. So if there's people who are interested, we haven't read a book, but today is like the kickoff for future months. So if you're interested in being a part, and the idea for those who don't know is to try to set a space up for people who want to engage monthly in exploring ideas of racism, white privilege, through the Dharma, but through the readings, but on our own. So if you want to talk, we can meet at 1, we can talk after, go out to lunch, but check in between them to see how we want to proceed today. So.
Anybody else?
I hope you're all on the is it the Yahoo group site? Anyway, I'll post a day long that's happening at the East Bay Meditation Center. Lama Rod Owens is coming on. I don't know if you know him, but he was one of the people who wrote Radical Dharma, and he's doing a day long for people who identify as male on decolonizing sexuality. And I find him to be very What's a good word to describe him? Just really interesting. I really like being around him.
It's inspiring.
Yeah, inspiring. He's really an amazing teacher. So, and I'll post the link to it so that you can register. And it's February 9th, and it's also Dharma. So there's no charge for it.
Anyone else?
Who's the host?
I'm the hostess. Double duty today. Wow. Yes, there are organic Satsuma mandarins and Fuji apples out there. Please help yourself. I'll be coming around the Dana Bowl. The Dana supports our Sangha. We pay the rent here, and Larkin Street volunteers and prison newsletters through stuff with Jack and multiple other things, I'm sure. And some people meet at the door at 12:30 to go out to lunch. You're welcome to do that. If you want to be on our email list, it's on the credenza. Have I forgotten anything? Oh, and next week. Yes. Next week is Baruch again, isn't
No.
it?
It's not me again.
JD.
It's JD.
Doyle.
It's JD Doyle.
Is he still talking about intimacy?
Yes. I think JD will be talking about...
JD.
Here it says January 13th is Baruch. Has that changed?
Who did that newsletter? No, JD is talking, and then on the third Sunday, Daigon Gathers talking.
Okay.
And then I'll be back on the 4th with Daigon.
And, I guess we're at dedication of maritime, so please stand and get in a circle. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.